when you study emergent complex systems and you see kind of how there's this correlation between the micro and the macro, I don't know if you saw those entangled photons that look like the yin and yang symbol that was in a recent study. I don't know if
Oh,
you
I
saw
haven't
that.
seen that.
Seeing those entangled photons and how they showed up and look like that, we'll put it on screen. It's interesting to see the deeper the study goes, the relationship between those two.
Yeah, and the more the esoteric continues to be revealed and validated, right? It's like it's having revival, but it just keeps pointing back to ancient wisdom that's been here all along. It's just almost like we had to go so far away from it to come back to it to realize, there is truth here. There's a deep meaning here, and I think sacred geometry is one of those ways in which the two really meet. Like every time you talk about sacred geometry, we have to talk about numbers. We have to talk about mathematics. We have to talk about harmony and frequency. And then of course you have symmetry and beauty and things like this that come in, but there's practicality to it as well. The reason those geometries are the building blocks for the physical world is because they're the most energy efficient way of organizing the various components. And so there is this beautiful dovetailing between, real like physical science and taking all the principles of energy conservation and efficiency and so forth. And then, the geometry that arranges whether they're the particles or the molecules or, whatever, whether it's crystals or the DNA itself or even at the subatomic levels and atomic orbitals, like everything, the deeper you probe, the more you realize that geometry is at the core of all of it. It's like, it is a language of creation of how things are built, not just in the physical, but also in the metaphysical or in the kind of the blueprints of this energetic realm that then ultimately governs how the physical components come together.
Yeah, I think for anybody who goes deep enough into many different fields, you start to see the similarities and interconnection of it, which makes sense, if there's this deeper underlying thing in which all external manifestations originate, and where mathematics, or mathematicians discover higher dimensional objects like the amplituhedron and see the inherent beauty in that complexity, and how that relationship between order, efficiency, and geometry is pervasive throughout the universe is, it's just exciting when you start to actually like experience and study truth and how things are really operating.
And I think even just like from a purely mathematical perspective, I remember in my undergraduate studies, I was in a honors calculus class, and the professor started getting into things like pi and phi and e, these fundamental constants that we have in the universe. And then seeing ultimately through like Euler's, identity equation that they all came together and, what seemed like they were separately discovered and they seemed like they were separate constants and they didn't really know why is it that number other than that's just kind of how it emerged through the formulas. But then to see them all come together in this like perfect unity, to me, the further I dove into math and the further I dove into science, and especially into quantum physics, to me, it always just validated that there is an intelligence behind this universe. There is beauty and reason and divine design, if you will, behind this universe. And even to the point of like, if we were to just change the mass of an electron by just a fraction of a percentage, the whole universe wouldn't have been able to come to bind together in the way that it has. And so there's such beauty behind it. And to me, the more I discovered and explored, the more I was like, there's got to be intelligence. There's got to be a consciousness. There's got to be a purpose behind it all.
It just provokes so much awe and wonder, especially when we're scientifically exploring, for example, what an electron is and these fundamental constituents and particles of the universe. And we realize, oh, we're also made of these things. It brings into question who we are and what our relationship is in the universe in a really, really interesting way. And one of these aspects, take it where you will, but from the quantum perspective, looking at ourselves as a quantum being, looking at life from pure possibility instead of the Newtonian probability way of navigating life radically shifts and orients ourselves differently towards life. So what do you think about that?
This is my favorite subject.
Me too.
um, yes, so Newton's laws of motion back, several hundred years ago were extrapolated and became a framework for a mindset that then got applied into economics, into business, into politics, into relationships, into psychology. That became a framework, those principles that we talked about at the beginning. And yet, in our world today, and people are still very much operating on that way of living. They still see themselves as separate from other things. They still think they can control everything. They still think, that they can just be rationalistic about everything. And yet our world today is like very different than it was 300-400 years ago. And that mindset isn't keeping up with the fast pace, the highly complex, the highly uncertain world that we live in today. And so I see the quantum principles and I've experienced it myself, that the more I came to really wrap my mind, but also my intuitive kind of relationship with these quantum principles, it informed a whole new way of looking at life. As you're saying, it opens up possibilities. In the uncertainty, for example, a lot of people fear uncertainty. They fear moving into the unknown because they can't control it. They don't know what's on the other side. And the separation kind of mindset makes them, react with fear. And maybe they'll go forward ready to fight. Maybe they'll freeze and just do nothing, or maybe they'll retreat away from that. But in a quantum mindset, for example, the uncertainty actually is where we have this opening up of superposition of many possibilities. And then it's a matter of like, what do you want to do with all those possibilities? What are you going to create? What are you going to choose to observe and make happen and make manifest in the uncertainty, right? So the uncertainty opens up the door for free will and choice and opportunity to come through again, and many possibilities. But you got to approach it with a positive attitude. You got to approach it with a certain embracing and optimism, moving towards it in a positive way. The connectivity, right? So instead of seeing things as separate and just isolating all the little parts, a quantum mindset says everything is connected. There's entanglement. And, that by our own interaction, we're entangled together, right? There's a connection that's established. And that connection can be non-local. So even when we leave this time and space, there's still a connection that happens, because in the quantum mindset, there really only is here and now. Because in that quantum field, everything is a oneness field. So, it changes everything as we start to embrace these quantum principles. And this is one of the things that I've become really passionate about teaching, is how we can take the quantum principles as a new framework that will really serve us in today's world. And it's not to say that we would throw the Newtonian principles out the door. It's more like we have to learn to, instead of just playing the game of life on one level, this 3D level, we have to learn to play the game of life on multiple dimensional levels. And on this level, we got the 3D Newtonian principles. And on another level, we've got the quantum principles. And when you can learn to shift between, you can make leaps, quantum leaps, if you will, in your life, and then bring that new possibility back down into your 3D reality. And so it's about becoming more multidimensional in our way of living life and knowing what's possible. And yet there are still rules and principles, if you will, in the quantum, and how to operate in that way correctly, where you really are accessing quantum potentials versus just imagining that you're accessing quantum potential. So I do believe that the world right now needs this kind of a mindset, and it dovetails beautifully with ancient wisdom. And so I like to see how, we can draw from ancient wisdom, and we can show how modern science, is matching and saying the same thing, so that we can come back to this era of a conjunction, of a union versus a separation.